Hi guys, Rachel here from The Confused Mom. Welcome to my channel, and today I'm doing a little pregnancy, postpartum, home birth Q&A, helping you guys figure out whether or not home birth is safe, as well as how to choose a birth team, getting your significant other on board, what the experience is like compared to a hospital, and so much more. And make sure to hit that subscribe and notification bell, because in my next video, I'm going to be talking about what I wish somebody had told me pre-conception, pregnancy, before postpartum, just like all of the things, little hacks, nutrition, all of this different stuff that had I known it would have made my postpartum experience a lot easier, and you definitely won't want to miss that video. It's been about 9 months since I had my son, my second baby. My first I had at the hospital over 3 years ago. Both experiences were amazing. I will leave links to both of those birth stories. I guess that leads me to the first most commonly asked question, and I had actually wanted to do a home birth with my first, and this was even the big question back then, which is obviously, is a home birth safe? When it comes to this, there are facts and then there are opinions, and so I'm going to answer this a couple of different ways. My personal opinion is that giving birth wherever you feel safest is ultimately going to be one of the biggest determining factors over how safe and comfortable your labor and delivery goes if you're a low risk pregnancy. Body needs to feel safe and relaxed in order to open up and do exactly what it was built to do. Statistically speaking, planned home births, and that word planned is very important because if you Google home birth statistics, not all of them take that into account, are considered just as safe as hospital births. But with that said, there is a lot of nuance to how we're defining safety. So I think essentially Erin, and I'll link her in the description box below, she's a nurse, she's a home birth mama. She does a really good job kind of explaining that distinction in the Happy Home Birth podcast episode, which I'll link in the description box below too. So in that episode, I think she does a really good job talking about the cascade of interventions that can happen with traditional OB-GYN care in a hospital setting versus midwifery, and just kind of the different skills and tool sets that those two types of practitioners have. And her Instagram also has tons of highlights with tons of research studies linked for a lot of the decisions that mothers have to make through the pregnancy and postpartum experience, which I guess kind of leads me to my own personal story, because if you had asked me in my early 20s what I planned on doing, I would have actually told you I planned on having a C-section. And I remember I was talking to my friend, I was probably only like 22 at the time, and I was talking to my friend who was in her 40s, she had multiple kids, and we were in the bathroom, and I said, yeah, I want to have a C-section when I have kids. And she, I'm not even kidding, did a full 180, face turned white and said, no you don't. And I was like, what do you mean no I don't? I'm like very type A, I like to control everything, that way I know exactly when the baby's coming, da 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 da. And she's like, think about it, Rachel, you will have just given birth to another human being and undergone major surgery that you need to recover from. And I was like, oh, you know, the person who had gotten it in my head that I wanted a C-section had never talked to me about that side of things before. Her words really hit me like a thunderbolt. So fast forward 6 or 7 years later, I find out I'm pregnant the same month I'm just due for my annual OB-GYN, and my OB at that time was actually the doctor who delivered me. And I went in for my annual appointment, and they were like, oh look, you're pregnant. I was like, yeah, I told you guys that on the phone. And they're like, okay, want to have your first ultrasound? Let's just scoot you into the room. Here's an ultrasound. Come back in a month for your next prenatal visit. And I was like, okay. So I come back a month later, and I had a lot of questions. I knew I didn't want a C-section at that point because my friend's words had really stuck with me. And if I was completely honest with myself, like going back to childhood, and there was just something deep down inside of me, I really always wanted to have a home birth. I'm a homebody. I love being home. There was something magical about being home to me. And I will never forget, I walked into that second prenatal appointment and they hand me a bill for $15,000. They were being like, excuse me? They're like, yeah, do you want to start a payment plan? I'm like, I'm gonna have new insurance by the time this baby comes, so like this isn't even gonna be like what my insurance policy is. Can we just not do any of this? Can I just like have my second prenatal appointment. I don't even know if I want to have a home birth or a hospital birth. And then that kind of set off like alarms throughout the office. Met with the other doctor in the practice who we had gone to the same college. He was a really nice guy. But I remember asking him, and this is a really important question to ask an OB if you are going the hospital route. I remember asking him what his C-section rate was. And they should be able to tell you a number, point blank, cut and dry, offhand. And in my personal opinion, if that number is above like 5 to 10, I probably wouldn't go with that care provider. I think the national average is like 30%. And I remember he did not answer my question directly. And that's always a really big red flag for me when looking for a birth team, is whether or not they answer my question directly. I remember he looked me in the eye and said, "I will do everything in my power to see that you don't end up with a C-section." And I remember looking him in the eye and just not believing him. So I think he sensed my apprehension. I still wasn't sold on not having a water birth or a home birth. So he told me to go across the street to do a tour of the hospital, like where I would give birth and all that stuff. So we went over there, and within 30 seconds of the tour, where they took us into the triage room, my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, absolutely not. Which really, really surprised me, because that is one of 2 hospitals nearest to us, and that is the hospital that I volunteered at as a kid. I was born at myself. I have a lot of positive memories at that hospital, whereas the other hospital is the one where my dad was in the ICU just before he passed away. And so I really did not want to give birth at that other hospital because I had so many negative memories of it. But when I saw the whole setup there, I was just like, no, this is not where I'm giving birth at all. So at that point, I was really like, okay, let's have the home birth conversation. My husband was not on board with the home birth, but he was okay with a birth center at that time. But when I asked them things like their transfer rate, which is another big question to ask if you are planning to do a birth center or a home birth, once again, I did not get a specific number, and that did not sit right with me. Ultimately, with my first baby, we ended up finding a midwife that a few of my friends used that did deliver at that other hospital. We did the tour there. It was night and day different. There was no triage. You're immediately admitted into an actual birthing room. And if they just decide you're not far along enough, they'll send you home. Like, it was just a very different tour experience that I really appreciated. Definitely still wishing I had a home birth. I had no support at that time frame. My husband wasn't on board. We have, between his side of the family and my side of the family, 6 doctors and nurses. So there was just a lot of opinions about home birth at that time. And I will say, wherever you choose to do, you do at the very least want your significant other to be on your team. So with my hospital birth, like I said, I had as positive as a hospital birth experience that you could ever want. My labor and delivery nurse was truly an angel, even in postpartum recovery. She came over and like prayed over me. I remember while I was pushing, having this very primal moment, because I had an unmedicated birth, and so I was using a rebozo over a bar here, so I was kind of like pulling up to push, like kind of in a crunch, and I remember just like roaring the baby out, and a nurse had walked into the back of the room. We made eye contact, and I just felt like an animal on display. I remember really not liking that feeling and wishing I was home. And then after I gave birth, my husband just felt very far away and very removed, because there's so many hands and so many people coming in, and it just felt like kind of a disconnected experience. So after the hospital birth experience, my husband really got on board with the home birth. He didn't like the bed. He didn't like feeling like an outsider. And on top of all of that, with my first, she came so quickly that they didn't even finish admitting me into the hospital fully before she was born. And so at the same time that I had my first baby, one of my friends was having her second baby, and she accidentally gave birth to her second baby at home with her toddler. At that same time, I started hearing a lot of stories about second babies, unplanned home births in the bathroom, in the closet, all of this type of stuff. And I just remember saying to my husband, like, yeah, we're closer to the hospital, but I'm also not sure if we would even get there in time, and I really don't want to have a baby on the side of the road. I think between all of that type of stuff, for us, it felt a lot safer and more comfortable to just have a planned home birth versus worrying about whether or not I'd make it to the hospital in time, who would watch our toddler. And I still have not actually spent a night away from my 3-year-old 5-year-old, so the idea that like the first time I'd be sending away from her would be 2 to 3 days, best case scenario, and then I'd come home with a new sibling. I just didn't love all of those other possibilities, and my husband thankfully was on board with all of that as well. Now with that said, having a second baby with a toddler at home is definitely has its own unique challenges. I had to keep reminding myself, because I literally gave birth, my son was born in the middle of the day, and I was doing bedtime routine like nothing happened that night. It was one of those things where I had to keep telling myself if I had a hospital birth, I would still be at the hospital, not seeing her yet. And so while I did practice 5 days in bed, 5 days around the bed, and 5 days around the house, I also kind of cheated because we had set up a spare bed in her playroom. Just had to be a lot stricter with myself, who is somebody that typically pushes themselves, with making sure that I was taking care of myself and the baby first. And so that was definitely a little bit more of a unique challenge in those first few days. Choosing your labor team. We have a place here locally that has like doulas, a prenatal chiropractor, birth classes, all that type of stuff. They used to be part of a birth center, but they split off, and they are just like a fabulous resource for us. I took hypnobirthing there with my first pregnancy, but I asked them for suggestions for home birth midwives, and ultimately I chose my home birth midwife because I trusted her to get my baby out safely. I had read reviews, and actually I think it was supposed to be a negative review where somebody wrote like she had to resuscitate the baby, and I was like, yes, that's who I want delivering, because if anything went wrong, I wanted somebody that had that skill set in their toolbox, and I personally felt the most comfortable with it. My midwife was not overly maternal and super warm. She was just very matter of fact. This is the standard of care typically. These are your options. Here's the risks, here's the benefits, it's your choice. And that was exactly what I kind of needed in a midwife this pregnancy. My doula was the ultra compassionate one that kind of was my sounding board through it all. I highly recommend having a doula. They're so much more than just like there on the day you give birth. She helped me formulate certain questions to ask and helped me kind of get my head around certain things that I had to choose throughout my pregnancy that were not traditional. And if you have the most supportive family and everything, I think doulas are just really good trained experts at helping you figure out so much that's unknown in the birthing experience. You know, both my pregnancies I went over 40 weeks. She got me a induction massage at home both times. She was my unofficial birth photographer and videographer both times. She is just amazing, and having somebody like that in your corner I think just really helps. You know, so much of this pregnancy with my second was about putting the power back in my hands and recognizing that it's my birth and I'm not there just to transfer care. In motherhood, we have to make so many choices along the way that, you know, we want somebody to tell us what to do, because if something goes wrong, it's easier to blame them. But motherhood is really about having to own our choices and own our mistakes, and that journey starts in pregnancy. I remember hearing Corey Malloy talk about, and I'll leave a link in the description box for her, where she talks about this, how redemptive her second baby was too. And she talked about the owning of the birthing experience versus transferring of care. You know, with my first baby, I really just looked to my midwife, who was like a very medical midwife, and went along with her suggestions, and I didn't ask questions. And there were things looking back that I wish I would have declined or pushed back on or done alternatively, but I just didn't even know that those were options for me. I didn't know really that I had a say in my care in that way. And so this whole experience, it definitely was a little bit emotionally harder at times, because you really do have to take responsibility for certain things along the way, understand the weight of your choices in a different way. But I will say, looking at my two kids, my son is significantly healthier than my daughter. And so as hard as those moments were in pregnancy and making some of those choices and postpartum and making some of those choices, I do feel blessed to have made them. And at least this way I understood the risks and benefits of my choice or action or inaction. You know, this birthing experience really pushed me back up against a wall, and learning to ask for help and accept it while also questioning things. You know, it pushed me to soften in areas I had previously been too hard in, and it pushed me to harden in areas, or to have more of a backbone in areas that I had been too soft in. Home birth is obviously very different than hospital birth, so you want to have a few extra things prepared. Number one is obviously you're going to need need diapers. Unlike a hospital where they just keep bringing you diapers, you are pretty much only gonna have like 1 or 2 from your midwife, maybe, so you're gonna need to have those on hand. Number 2 is you're probably gonna wanna have a thermometer on hand. So at the hospital, they're coming in, they're doing pulse checks, temp checks, all of that type of stuff. It takes like a couple of days for babies to regulate their own temperature. So lots and lots of skin time during that time, and you can use a temperature just to keep an eye on things if you're nervous. And then the last thing, and this is for whether or not you have a home birth or just are a parent in general, I think every family should have a stethoscope at home. So you want to be sure to listen to baby's lungs and all of your family members' lungs so you know what they sound like when they're clear. And that way, if at any point, whether it's after a home birth or just in their life, you can go ahead and hear what their lungs sound like to see if there's any fluid or something going on there that you do need to get to a doctor for. So just knowing their baseline is really, really helpful kind of thing to have in your toolbox at home next to your band-aids and all that other type of stuff. Make sure to hit that subscribe and notification bell so you don't miss future videos in this series, including little midwife hacks for labor and delivery and those early postpartum days with baby. What I wish I knew preconception, pregnancy, and postpartum, that is definitely one of my must-watch videos. And until next time, my name's Rachel. Have a good one.